this fall's first two gubernatorial debates. Mike Braun's attack ad runs afoul of state law, plus behavioral health's new price tag, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending October 4th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting stations.
This week, Indiana voters got a chance to watch two televised debates in the governor's race, hosted by Indianapolis stations Fox 59 CBS 4 and Wish TV. And in both debates, the candidates were happy to draw sharp contrasts with each other. In the first debate, Mike Braun and Jennifer McCormick spoke about the policy proposals they've released in recent weeks, from property taxes to utility costs, teacher pay to affordable housing. But on so many of the issues, the bottom line came down to this. They say it's the other party that's to blame for any problems. For Braun, that meant tying McCormick to national Democrats.
When I travel the state, they're worried about the economy. The federal government has been run by her party over the last 4 years, and we've got some of the worst economic results we've had ever.
McCormick kept her focus at the state level.
Indiana that we're talking about today, that is 47th in the nation in quality of life, 41st in the nation in educational attainment. You know, we can go on, and some of the statistics that are alarming have been under 20 years of one-party rule under Republicans.
Libertarian Donald Rainwater was excluded from the first debate by station owner Nexstar for not meeting its polling threshold. In the second, he freely criticized both his opponents on many of their policy proposals, saying he's the only candidate who would disrupt the system.
I don't have anybody pulling my strings or giving me large campaign donations in order to make sure that I do things their way.
The three candidates will meet in one more debate later this month.
Will these debates make an impact at the polls? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat, Elise Shrock. Republican, Mike O'Brien. John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers. And Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Elise, was there really a clear winner in these two debates?
Yeah, I think Jennifer McCormick did great. She came out strong. She provided a contrast as a common sense candidate. And not only did she come across strong on the debate, it provided a sense of strength in a wider sense to where it translated to a six-figure investment from the DGA after these debates. So it will translate in the polls because now we have more resources to work with. And I think she really did a great job of coming to the stage prepared with policy answers, prepared to speak to issues that Hoosiers care about with some plans. And she's the person on the stage that has the experience in state government, handling the people's business, and made a good case for how she's going to do that.
In many ways, did this feel like a throwback debate to what debates used to be, which was, yeah, they attacked each other, quote unquote, attacked each other, in that they criticized each other's policies or experience and things like that, but it wasn't name calling. It was, we're focused on, all the questions were about, like, these are the issues we're talking about in the campaigns, and it felt like the candidates stepped up to that.
They even shook each other's hands. I mean, how low is the bar for civility in a debate? Yeah, no, I thought it was, we always talk about, well, what's the value of these things? Did anybody get anything out of it? And I think you did get a contrast, and we'll see which one prevails. Mike Braun, he's got a good story to tell. I mean, he's a businessman who's telling a good story on property taxes and how he's going to provide relief there. He's got a good story on how he reformed his employees' health insurance plan. It hasn't increased premiums in 16 years. He's talking about rural Indiana and the investments that can be made there. So I think it is a contrast in issues. We totally agree on that. But then you look at the strength of the campaign, just as like a campaign guy, coming into the week, you are looking at like, okay, the last minute investments. What are we, you're kind of making your last ad buy through election day. So you're watching for that. What are the campaigns doing? McCormick had a couple things that were bad signs, cut her 30-second ads to 15-second ads, which is not something that you do if you're healthy financially. The DGA money was definitely a lifeline. It was more because of Mark Robinson and the Black Nazi in North Carolina and the DGA getting the hell out of town, because that is an easy Democrat win now, where before it was probably the biggest race in the country. Yeah. But I think she's good. I think if I was with Mike Braun a few times this week, or in rooms where he was speaking, and a core part of his message right now is to Republicans: don't assume we're going to win. Don't sleepwalk through October, and I've thought for all year, I've thought this race is a lot more politically in Indiana, like 2012, than anything like 2016 or 2020. Kamala Harris coming on the ticket, Joe Biden coming off, it clearly softened down ballot races. And so Republicans are definitely going to have to run through this tape. I'm not trying to dismiss, any part of this that Republicans are going to have to pay attention.
Might make the joke about the low bar for civility in the debate, but maybe this is part of that. But credit to Mike Braun for agreeing to all of these debates. He's agreeing to all 3 debates.
That is a really low bar.
It is a very low bar, but increasingly,
especially as a sitting elected official, to agree to come to a stage and contribute to a public forum.
And yet. But
that's a national low bar.
Yeah, that's true. He unquestionably had the most to lose, certainly, in these things, but I don't think he lost any ground in these debates.
I don't think he lost anything. I don't think Jennifer McCormick lost anything. And you talk about debates being a throwback to another time, and we have seen in the past, if we want to talk about, rolling back the history machine, where debates have been decisive, not because of a great performance, but perhaps because of a real blunder or a misstep or mistake. Richard Murdoch comes to mind, a former federal candidate from the state of Indiana. That didn't happen this time. So the notion of do no harm was both sides lived up to that. I think Hoosiers demand a certain level of civility that maybe isn't demanded nationally, but I think Hoosiers want their gubernatorial candidates to shake hands, to be civil. And these candidates, if you look back at the Republican primary, once you saw that, get past that, we could probably predict that this would be a fairly civil return to normalcy.
Mike Braun
in a way it might not have been with some of the other candidates if they had emerged victorious. So no harm, no foul.
In terms of the substance, too, do you think voters got a pretty clear picture? Certainly, of 2 nights with Braun and McCormick, and only 1, unfortunately, with Donald Rainwater, which is frustrating to me as a journalist to see him excluded from one of the debate stages. But do you think voters got a real sense of who these candidates are and what they want to do?
Oh, I think so. I think they were pretty clear on their proposals, their plans. I'm glad they actually have proposals and plans. Yeah. There's some substance to these campaigns, which I've been excited about.
Stickler for ideas.
I know. I love substance.
But there's been no shortage.
So I really hope voters were watching, because you learned a lot about their positions on property taxes and marijuana and abortion and education. And I mean, my only slight quibble is that several of the questions were repetitive from night to night. So maybe, hopefully, the third one that's coming at the end of the month, hopefully we'll get some fresh questions.
I do think Braun had the tougher job in that when you have a Republican whose place you aspire to take, you really don't have a lot of wiggle room. Yes, you can do what he did and say you created a national climate, Joe Biden did, that's not conducive to job growth.
But I mean, in the second debate, Braun was happy to say Republicans have gotten complacent.
Yep.
But it's still tougher than it is it's when you have the governor's office, as the Republican Party does, you don't have as much running room, even if the White House is controlled by a Democrat, because you can always say federal policies have set this environment that is, again, conducive to job growth and economic development, but it was screwed up at the state level. If you're the Democrat, you can say that. So a little bit more challenging, perhaps, in the nuances.
All right. Republican gubernatorial candidate Mike Braun says he's replacing a doctored image in an attack ad against Democrat Jennifer McCormick. The ad, which began airing this week, ran afoul of the state's new law governing digital manipulation of campaign materials. The Braun ad altered a photo of a McCormick campaign rally to falsify the signs McCormick supporters were holding as they stood behind the Democrat. Braun says he didn't decide to doctor the image and that when he initially reviewed the ad, it looked okay. He says he's now decided to replace the altered image entirely and use the original photo without falsified campaign signs.
I think the content of what's in the ad will stick, and that's just telling the truth about where she's coming from.
The McCormick campaign called the original ad dishonest and accused Braun of being desperate to distract voters. Mike O'Brien, should Indiana do more than just require a disclaimer for these sorts of ads?
This is an interesting one for me. I think the debate at the State House last year was a concern about AI and that kind of like deep fake stuff.
Yes.
Like you're putting Kamala Harris or Jennifer McCormick on TV with a video of her saying things that she never said, right? Yeah. So that was what was driving that legislation. This ad, a couple things. This ad, I didn't think that's no different for me than when a campaign makes their opponent black and white and grainy and slows the video down or distorts.
Which would be illegal as well under Indiana statute.
It wouldn't be illegal. You just have to disclose it. But that's no different than things we've done, for 250 years back to Harper's Daily and putting Thomas Jefferson's head on a rooster. So that's so one, I think like this was just kind of normal ad stuff. Now I do think there's going to need to be in the future. As AI and these things become more, we see these fake videos online and just like the truly deepfake stuff has got to...
Was somebody faked Joe Biden calling New Hampshire voters earlier this year, telling him not to vote or something like that.
So I think that's what where the legislature's mind was. The funny thing about this was it did create a conversation about no gas stoves. So a lot of people are like, what was he even talking about? That this Green New Deal polls really well with Republicans and independent voters in Indiana. So that's part of the motivation for talking about it. And again, it created this platform to talk about banning gas stoves, which sounds absurd if you're not paying attention, but gave kind of a bigger platform to actually talk about the issue. It was kind of
like
J.D. Vance saying you can make up a story to get attention. Not always a good idea.
So, I mean, I agree with Mike, which is this ad is not, I think, what both parties were talking about at the State House when they wrote this law.
But it doesn't make it any less disingenuous, and it's talking about it's showing something that didn't happen. I mean, if you're a person in that photo that showed up for that rally, is just someone who is trying to support that campaign. These are real people, and now they're blasted on an ad in a context that they never signed up for. It's super disingenuous. It's also not the first time that Mike Braun is getting dinged for something like this. This isn't the first transparency issue he had. He got handed down one of the largest FEC fines from the last campaign that he had for fines from a campaign finance issue. So this is a habitual thing for Mike Braun, and it's more about a leadership issue for me on whether or not he's willing to cross a line when campaigning. It's not about the issue at hand, whether or not it's about stoves. It's not. This is more about what type of leader is Mike Braun going to be. I think this week for these two candidates was pretty contrasting. We had a candidate that showed up to a debate stage, crushed it, did well, and didn't have anything to lose. We had another candidate that showed up to the debate stage, which, gold star, I guess, but also had to defend. Said he wasn't going to show up.
You're just throwing Donald Trump shade on Mike Braun.
Then had to spend most of his week defending things that his LG candidate said, and had to defend this ad. So it was not a great week for Mike Braun. It was a pretty good week for Jennifer McCormick.
Do you think this ad is more of just a blip, or is it anything that, I mean, we are close to the election now, so it is something that could have legs. Do you think it will?
Yeah, I think it's probably moved on, though the cycle lasted for several days, so that's not good. I mean, the fact is, they manipulated the image, and I do think the point that it was more than the candidate, it was real people, it makes it a little different than some of what you're saying. B, they clearly didn't realize there was a new disclaimer law. They fixed that. Then they also didn't get permission to use the photo from the South Bend Tribune. They don't have copyright on that photo, guys. And so it definitely was not a good look. And some people were wondering, like me, like, he's leading in all these polls, even the ones that are, tight, allegedly. So the fact that he even went negative in the first place is an intriguing little tidbit.
To that end, does it show that he's a little concerned? Or to Mike's point, not taking anything for granted?
I presume that's the case. I mean, shame on him if he does take it for granted. I mean, there's so much uncertainty that could happen at the federal level, international level. Who knows what spillover effect there could have. You guys, are a lot more forgiving than I am. To me, when you change, I'm old enough to remember when a photo didn't lie. Now, I know it does, we can all manipulate, but that doesn't mean you should. Whether it's AI generated, whether it's not. I think that we're all kind of laughing because it said no gas stoves. But what if the McCormick, this were a reverse situation and you had swastikas with Braun supporters or saying let pregnant women die or something, there would be outrage. I don't think you can go mucking with people's messages that way. And if you don't have your own message that's strong enough, shame on you as a candidate. So now I don't think you could ban your question about is a disclaimer enough? It has to be, because the First Amendment you can't ban a political ad, nor would I condone that or anyone else who appreciates the First Amendment, I would think. So a disclaimer has to suffice. But there's some punishment perhaps in the dishonesty. Look at the congressional candidate from Virginia that had to borrow a family for his spot, wife and the kids, because he didn't have his own and wanted one on his campaign website. I think voters don't appreciate that.
Time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is, should Indiana ban digital manipulation that creates falsified images in campaign ads? A, yes, or B, no. Last week's question was, will the General Assembly take meaningful steps to reduce healthcare costs in 2025? 14% of you say yes, 86% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, a new report from the Indiana Behavioral Health Commission says the state needs to invest more funding and attention to continue improving behavioral health infrastructure. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports the commission recommends expanding on previous investment, building the state's workforce, and addressing care for vulnerable populations.
The report recommends building on the current work being done with the 988 crisis response system and certified community behavioral health clinics. It also makes specific recommendations to address workforce shortages and care for children, older adults, and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Senator Mike Kreider says his goal since creating the commission in 2020 was to institute long-term sustainable funding for programs or initiatives related to behavioral health care.
Unless and until we get in a mode where we have long-term sustainable funding, we're going to continue having this discussion in spite of the federal grants and the other things that we've seen, the other progress that we've seen.
Kreider says how the recommendations from the commission would be funded is ultimately up to the General Assembly.
John Schwantes, we keep talking about big-ticket budget items, infrastructure, health care, education, etc. Where will this budget ask rank in terms of priorities?
Well, if you look at the reports you just mentioned, I think the total cost of lost, wages, lost tax revenue, I think we're up to about $10 billion. So we get this resolved, we're sitting on easy street.
Spent the surplus like 5 times.
Exactly. There will be those who say we have a lot of priorities. We just invested heavily in this in a prior session, but. And here's the but. This is an issue, unlike so many others, that doesn't break down where you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, or you're urban, you're rural. You live in a county with a lot of jobs and manufacturing and infrastructure, and you don't. You're an agrarian community. This is equal opportunity scourge. And I think there's not a member of the General Assembly who has not been touched by mental health issues, whether it's a family member, a friend, or maybe they themselves. Or they themselves. Yeah. So this is atypical in many ways in the way we frame the prism through which we view issues, those 3 I just mentioned, RD, urban, rural, job rich, job poor. So I guess that's a way of saying, even though there are a lot of priorities, this will be at or near the top.
How much does it help that what they're saying is let's build on what we've already spent, as opposed to having to go from 0 to 100?
I think it definitely helps. I think another thing that helps is they are coming at them with some possible revenue sources. They're saying, look, again, we have a lower cigarette tax increase than like most of the nation, so that's an easy lift. Or, a lot of other states are now putting, a fee on their cell phone to aid, the suicide prevention lines and things like that. So that's another option. So at least they're coming forward with, design pots of money that could help fund this ask.
Yeah, how much will that? They've been talking about the cigarette tax for more than a decade now, I think, in terms of a revenue source. The cell phone thing came up the last time when they initially created this new funding for behavioral health infrastructure. Are we going to finally see lawmakers have to go, listen, we only have so much money. It's time to look at these alternative revenue sources?
I think they're going to have to, and I think the makeup of the committee is really positive. You have people like State Senator Andrea Hundley, who's been in the schools and is coming at it with a great perspective of how this issue affects families, how it affects, she brought up great points about the school counselor ratios, and you have an occupational therapist like Dr. Garcia Wilburn, who's a state representative, who's going to bring her expertise, and the others on this commission who have a real earnest ability to work across the aisle and problem solve. So I think that type of efficiency is going to help make the case for where we can find revenue streams, where we can find efficiencies, and really do right by Hoosiers. So I'm really optimistic about this based on the makeup of the committee and the commitment to this work.
Yeah, and sort of this question I asked Niki, but there's already work being done. They are able to go to lawmakers and say, look, you spent all this money 2 years ago, and look at all the things we're doing with it. Look at the progress we're making. We can't let up now. Is that going to be maybe the strongest argument in favor of we need more money?
It'll be the argument, but remember when Senate Bill 1, it was a big deal for Senate Bill 1 to be completely focused on mental health, like the Senate's top priority 2 years ago. It came with a $500 million price tag, and they funded half of it. And didn't raise any of these taxes, which this isn't a new recommendation. This is an old recommendation with the cell phones, and I cannot see the legislature. Senate Bill 1 this year is likely to be property tax relief. Senate Bill 1 is going to cost money to the state. So then you argue. I think probably the odds of raising the cigarette tax are better than they have been ever. Part of that's motivated by Medicaid shortfall. House has already passed that 3 times. The Senate just has to get on board like they haven't before. But man, now we're going to talk about the gas tax. We're going to talk about the beer tax. We're going to talk about the cell phone tax. We're going to talk about the sports betting tax. It's like you start hitting some what are you doing down there with people? Understanding that there needs to be investments put in here. But I think the politics of the tax bill is getting pretty heavy at this point.
I also wonder what the impact of some of the new reporting coming out from Mirror Indy and others on private behavioral health companies and some of the real problematic things that we're seeing. Some of that reporting has just been so
that's what happens when you flood the market with money.
Compelling
You get bad
and very, very sad to see. So it's there's going to need to be some oversight that comes and that's costly, but it's going to have to be part of that conversation as well.
Right. Eli Lilly announced Wednesday it will invest another $4.5 billion into a new facility at the state's controversial Leap District in central Indiana. This latest expansion brings Lilly's total pledged investment at the site to more than $13 billion and potentially 1,300 jobs.
The project will be a joint research and medicine manufacturing facility. Lilly CEO Dave Ricks says it's the most ambitious expansion agenda in the company's history.
This site will allow us to scale up quickly, not relying on others to do so, get our clinical trials running, and get medicines to patients faster.
Criticism of the Leap District has been centered on how much money the state has poured into it, as well as whether there will be enough water resources to support it. Governor Eric Holcomb says the state will help ensure everyone has the water they need, and that announcements like this one make the costs worth it.
This is a proud, patriotic day for the state of Indiana. We are responding to the demand globally for a product that is needed to improve and save lives.
In a statement, Citizens Action Coalition says the state is diverting hundreds of millions of dollars meant to help provide clean drinking water for people, quote, so a few companies looking to build factories in a relative water desert can financially benefit.
Niki Kelly, does an announcement like this quiet the criticism of the Leap District?
I mean, to a little bit, but the base issues of the Leap District, the fact is, even with this, we're up to about 800 acres of use, and they either bought or have options on 8,000 acres. So I think people in Boone County still want to know what's going to happen. Why did you take all that acreage if we don't have plans for it yet? We're going into year 3 of working on this project. So, and obviously the water is still kind of an issue. It seems like the massive pipeline is basically dead. I think the idea that a big semiconductor plant will come seems to be much less likely than it was.
There have been Republicans who are starting to be concerned. Maybe somebody lost their seat over concerns about the water stuff. Does this quiet any of that at the State House next year?
I don't know. I guess it could, but I think you're going to see some energy behind groups like Citizens Action Coalition who are able to organize around this, and that's where you're going to see a lot more energy this session.
Are you just using energy as a quip or
energy?
Subliminal energy.
You're going to see some oomph behind them from this.
Will you agree that there's still a lot of criticism around this project? Even
well, NIMBYism is driving it, and so if you put more things in people's backyard, you're not going to make them happier. That's not the reason not to do it. There's like enormous upside, obviously, to Lilly doing well and continue to invest and expand.
As a Boone County resident, I'm excited about Lilly being there.
I don't think it's the goal that people are questioning, it's the process.
Oh, well, yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone, this coming Monday, October 7th, is the deadline to register or update your voter registration if you want to cast a ballot in this fall's election. And if you're watching this show, we certainly hope that you do. Your vote matters, so make sure it counts. That is Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.